Imagine you're walking through a really busy old English marketplace, maybe in the 1700s or 1800s. You smell fresh bread, hear people shouting and bargaining, and there are animals being led down muddy paths. But then, something totally unexpected catches your eye: a woman standing quietly. She has a ribbon around her neck, and her hand isn't held by a loved one, but by a man who is clearly trying to sell her, and she's not there to buy anything. She's the one being sold. This wasn't just a story from a book. It was a real, though not legal, thing that happened across Britain for a long time, from the late 1600s all the way up to the early 1900s. Back then, getting a divorce was almost impossible for most regular people. So, selling a wife became a strange, public, and symbolic way for working-class couples to end their marriages. Even though it sounds shocking to us today, this practice didn't start as something cruel or legal. Instead, it was a way to deal with how hard and expensive it was to get a formal separation. In those days, women had very few rights, and once you were married, a woman's money and freedom legally belonged to her husband. So, ending a marriage was often much more complicated than starting one. For most couples, a real divorce was just a dream they couldn't reach. The process was super expensive, legally tricky, and would ruin your reputation. You needed a special act of parliament, or a church separation that didn't even let you remarry, or really long, costly court fights. All of this was way out of reach for average working people. Often, one or both partners just wanted to split up, but since there was no legal way, wife selling became a weird but public alternative. The first known case was recorded in 1692, when a man named John Whitehouse sold his wife to another man. We don't know much about how that sale happened, but it kicked off a social custom that quietly continued for over 2 centuries. Even though it was never officially legal, it existed in a strange area where it was tolerated. People saw it more as a ritual than a real business deal. The process usually followed a certain pattern. Sometimes, notices would even be put up in town, telling people about an upcoming sale. On the day, the woman would be dressed up and led through town, usually with a halter or ribbon around her neck or waist. This was more symbolic than actually holding her back. She'd be taken to a public spot, like a market square, a pub yard, or even the steps of a courthouse. There she'd be tied to a post and offered for sale. The person who offered the most money, often her new partner, would then take her away. What might sound like a horrible event was, in many cases, actually something both the husband and wife agreed on. A lot of these sales weren't forced or violent. They were arrangements that allowed both people to move on with their lives when society offered them almost no other options. Some women even insisted on choosing who bought them, and in rare cases, they refused the man who offered the most money. There were even times when the wife was already living with the buyer before the sale even happened. In one sale in 1824, the woman didn't like the first winner and asked to be put up for auction again. A lower offer was accepted, along with a quart of ale, as long as it came from someone she actually liked. This shows the strange mix of public show and practical agreement in these deals. Not every woman was just a passive object. Some were fully aware, fully okay with it, and in a few cases, even started the whole thing. These public sales served a deeper purpose than you might think. In a society where appearances and reputation were everything, putting on a sale was a very public announcement. The marriage was over, the relationship was done, and the original husband was no longer responsible for any future problems, especially debts or supporting his former wife. By leading the woman with a ribbon or halter, both people were telling everyone in the community that their legal and social connection had ended. Some examples of wife selling were surprisingly organized. In January 1815, a man named John Osborne sold his wife and child for €1 inside a tavern because there was no market happening that day. That same year, a woman was brought to Smithfield Market and sold for 50 guineas and a horse. She left with her new partner in a carriage without any sign of hesitation. These events drew crowds not just because they were rare, but because they were such a spectacle. In one case, a sale had to be put off because so many people showed up it stopped the market. While many sales seemed civil, and even cooperative. Others were driven by jealousy or anger. In 1804, a London shopkeeper caught his wife with another man. The argument didn't turn violent. Instead, the other man offered to buy her, and the shopkeeper agreed. It was settled right there, and then not through long court battles or scandalous gossip, but as a quick, final deal. However, not all women agreed to the arrangement. In 1766, a carpenter in Swaffham sold his wife while he was drunk at a pub. There's no record that she agreed to it. The next day, he regretted what he did and begged her to come back. She said no. Overwhelmed by shame and sadness, he later took his own life. This darker side of the tradition reminds us that behind these public displays were real people with real feelings and serious consequences. Even though they weren't official, wife sales were often seen as a legitimate way to end a marriage, especially by local communities. Former husbands would publicly state they were no longer connected to their wives. In Ipswich, one man put out an advertisement in 1789 warning people not to lend his wife any money using his name, saying she was no longer his responsibility. These announcements weren't legally binding, but everyone in society understood what they meant. Pubs and inns were common places for these sales. In Sussex, they were well-known spots. Payments were often made not just with money, but with drinks. In 1898, a wife was sold for 7 shillings and a quart of beer. Earlier, in Brighton, another man accepted 8 pots of beer. In 1790, a man traded his wife for half a pint of gin, only to change his mind later and buy her back. Despite some people accepting it, many others found the practice awful. In 1797, a journalist from the Times newspaper saw a sale and called it a disgraceful act of the lower classes. Judges and authorities started to speak out against it publicly. In one 1806 case, police even had to protect the husband from an angry crowd who were furious about him trying to sell his wife. Even though the practice hung around, public opinion started to shift. By the 1830s, wife sales began to happen less often. More people were becoming aware of women's rights, and new family laws started to change how people thought. In 1857, the Matrimonial Causes Act made divorce more accessible, especially for the middle class. Finally, there was a legal, recognized way to end a marriage without going to markets or pubs. Still, the ritual quietly continued in country areas. The very last known wife sale in England was reported in 1913, when a woman told a court that her husband had sold her to one of his co-workers for just a single £1. It wasn't a big public event, just a quiet deal, a leftover from a tradition that was slowly dying out. The history of wife selling might seem really strange to us today, even ridiculous, but within it lies an important truth about social class, gender, and how desperate people were in the old days. For those stuck in poverty, bound by social rules, or unable to access the legal system, this public act offered something that courts and official places couldn't: a sense of finality, independence, and a strange kind of respect. Underneath the ribbons and beer mugs, these were stories of people trying in their own unusual way to get some control back in a society that offered them very few choices. And so, as we look back at these truly astonishing stories from the past, we're reminded that history isn't just about dates and famous figures. It's about the incredible, often surprising, ways real people navigated their lives through challenging times. Join us next time on Whispered Historians as we continue to uncover the hidden tales that shaped our world.